God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam and the mountains quake with their surging. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy place where the Most High dwells. God is within her, she will not fall. God will help her at the break of day. Nations are in uproar, kingdoms fall. He lifts his voice, the earth melts. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Come and see the works of the Lord, the desolations he has brought on the earth. He makes wars cease to the ends of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the shields with fire. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord Almighty is with me. The God of Jacob is our fortress.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Thanks. Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning, and welcome to HTC. And if you are visiting today on this special day, a particular warm welcome to you, of course. In preparing to speak today, I spent some time reading about members of my family who had served in the World Wars. I read about one relative of mine called Ronnie. He was imprisoned at Colditz Castle, the infamous Colditz Castle, once dubbed escape-proof. But using bed sheets, the distractions of a legless fellow prisoner, Uncle Ronnie, he escaped through an air vent, and I'm told is one of only 32 to have ever escaped. I also read about someone called Adela Stevenson. She was a caring nurse in the war. But don't let that fool you. She was apparently a crack shot. So good, in fact, that apparently when two lions attacked her while she was in Africa during the war, she shot them both with double revolvers. Sounds like something from a Western, doesn't it? But during World War II, she was living under enemy occupation, and she apparently annoyed the officials so much that she was sent to a concentration camp. A formidable lady. But there was one story that really moved me in this reading that I was doing. And that was the story of my great-grandfather. He served in the Battle of the Atlantic, escorting ships, convoys across the ocean. And it was a deadly task. The makeshift guns on these ships were useless against the German U-boats. And my great-grandfather, he made 20 perilous crossings. But there was one that changed him forever. He had been given orders not to stop for survivors if the convoy was attacked. And on one crossing, a very good friend of his was washed overboard. And my great-grandfather saw his great friend struggling, drowning, calling for help in the water. And as I read the letters, I saw that he gave the orders to keep going, to steam on his ship. His friend drowned, and the memory apparently haunted him ever since. Now, reading these stories, it reminds me of the emotions many of us will be feeling today. You know, it is a unique day, isn't it? Remembrance Sunday, a unique day. On the one hand, it fills us with awe, unbelievable awe, at the courage, the sacrifice made by so many for the sake of you and me today. And then on the other hand, it can also leave us feeling troubled. You know, remembering the dead can bring to mind those we've lost, perhaps even more recently. The wounds of grief momentarily reopened. And it can also make us look out to the world with doubt. You know, World War I was called the war to end all wars. And yet around 20 years later came World War II. And then since then, countless wars, conflicts have followed. And then, of course, today, the images from Ukraine, Sudan, Gaza, Israel, and elsewhere, they remind us, don't they, that trouble has not ended. And for many of us, the troubles, well, they feel closer to home. I can think of someone in this church this week who told me that he'd been diagnosed with an incurable condition that means one day he probably won't be able to walk. Or a couple grieving the death of a friend from cancer. Or a husband who shared with me the pain of a miscarriage. Which is why our psalm today is so relevant. Psalm 46 was written in a time of uncertainty and trouble. The psalmist describes it very poetically, as though the earth is kind of giving way. Mountains are kind of falling into the sea. Waters are roaring and foaming, quaking with surging. It's a picture of life's turbulence, isn't it? A world and emotions that feel shaken to their core. Many, perhaps even all of us, will know something of this experience. You know, when our hearts are troubled, when we too can feel as though the earth under our feet is just kind of giving way. And so in this psalm, we're given two encouragements. The first is this: to take refuge in God's power. To take refuge in God's power. As you read through the letters of soldiers fighting in the trenches in the First World War, you can't miss this kind of sense of helplessness many of them felt. In a copy of the Spur magazine in 1917, one anonymous soldier wrote, he said, "We're living in a tunnel, dark and cold, deep down in the gloom of life, catching the breath and nervously shaking as you hear the shells shriek overhead and wonder where the next bombs will drop." It's a gut-wrenching, isn't it, sort of depiction of a living nightmare. He describes it as the gloom of life. Now, whilst none of us will have served in the trenches at the Somme, we might know a sense of that horror as we too face trouble in our lives that bring great destruction. And yet we too can also feel that sense of kind of powerlessness to alter it. And our psalmist, he was clearly facing something similar. And yet very surprisingly in this psalm, there is so much hope in his words. He even says in verse 2 that he will not fear. Now, what hope can there possibly be when we experience trouble? When we today remember the lives of those who died so bravely to bring us the freedom that we enjoy today? Well, the psalmist, he shows us the way. He's taking refuge, shelter in God's power. It says in verse 1, God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. In other words, there's no better place to be, no better person to turn to. In verse 6, the picture is of a chaotic war with nations in uproar. But all God needs to do is lift his voice and the quarrelsome nations, they're no more. The earth melts. He makes wars cease in verse 9. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the shields with fire. As I was preparing this talk, I had this little wooden image on my shelf looking down on me. It was given to me by a vicar in Germany, just quite recently, in fact. It shows Jesus, there's a picture of it on the screen, it shows Jesus, the Son of God, standing on a boat in the middle of a great storm, commanding the raging waves, "Be still, be still." It's an extraordinary moment because it mirrors arguably the greatest display of power in our psalm today. In verse 10, God doesn't look at a kind of a raging sea, but instead he's looking at a raging battlefield and he commands the armies, "Be still." There's no question, no one is more powerful than God. And it's in this power that you and I today are invited to take refuge in whatever we're facing at the moment. But perhaps you're here and you're listening to this and you're thinking, okay, if God is so powerful, why doesn't he just stop wars right now that we see around us? If he's so powerful, why doesn't he end the trouble that I face in my life today? Perhaps he's not as powerful as this psalm claims. Well, if that's a doubt of yours, you're in good company. Jesus' very first disciples, well, they wrestled with the same question. They expected Jesus to come with military power and might to overthrow the Roman Empire. But Jesus didn't. And as we read through the Gospels, it's clear this wasn't because he lacked power. No, he showed power over nature, miraculously calming storms with just his words. He shared power over human bodies, healing the sick and the blind miraculously. And still today, there are times when God intervenes in specific moments of trouble. Even this past week, someone shared with me how God had met her in a time of crisis, miraculously through a dream. She felt his comfort and direction in a way she couldn't explain. So the question isn't whether God can act. He does, he can, and sometimes in miraculous ways. But when we look to Jesus, we see that God's plan is far deeper than solving individual crises or ending one particular war. His ultimate intention is to deal with the root of the problem itself. On Remembrance Sunday last year, I remember reading an article that had been written by someone called Admiral Sir Tony Ranakin, who was at the time the chief of the defense staff. And he wrote this, he said, "Today we remember those who gave their tomorrows for our today. Out of the ashes of war, a better world was forged. Let us recommit ourselves to do whatever it takes to defend their legacy for our benefit and that of generations to come." And when I read those words, and as I read those words even right now, my heart is moved. It really is. It's so moved. I think of the family members who gave their tomorrows for my today. I think of my great-grandfather obeying orders. How difficult must it have been for him, obeying orders and leaving his friend to drown? And I want to honor that sacrifice. I really do, with all my heart. And yet, even as I do, I know the same weakness that caused those wars to happen, well, they're still at play today. Admiral Ranakin spoke of a better world being forged. And in some ways, he's of course right. We haven't had another world war. But the world is far from perfect. You don't have to look very far. You don't have to read the news for very long. You don't have to even look at our own hearts themselves at times. There is something fundamentally wrong. We don't treat each other as we should. I know I don't. We don't treat God as we should. There is trouble around us, even sometimes inside us. What we need is not a God who will merely kind of step in occasionally to fix things. But what we need is a God powerful enough to deal with the root of the problem itself, who can recreate a world, where wars and conflicts, they don't just stop for a time, but where it's not even possible for them to start at all. A survey in the UK recently found that the most asked question people have is, will everything be okay? Will everything be okay? Deep down, we long for a God who can answer that with a definite yes. Yes, yes, everything will be okay. Which is why Jesus says to his disciples, and he says to us today, in this world, you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. When we take refuge in him, we can be confident everything will be okay. Through his death and resurrection, Jesus revealed a power that our psalm is just kind of a mere signpost to. One that doesn't just overcome death, although it does, but also the brokenness behind every conflict and every fractured relationship. If you take refuge in Jesus today, that same power is at work in your heart. It brings us forgiveness, brings us peace, the beginnings of a world made new. Everything will be okay. Not because this world is free from trouble, but because the Lord has already overcome it and will one day make all things right. So our psalm today first encourages us to take refuge in God's power. Secondly, and much more briefly, it invites us to find comfort in God's presence. Twice the psalmist declares, "The Lord Almighty is with us." Whatever trouble the psalmist faced, it must have been a real comfort to know that he wasn't alone, that God was with him in that trouble. We can probably all relate, can't we, to that feeling of loneliness when we face trouble. In those moments, the world kind of just feels like it's kind of shrinking in on us. I remember that very clearly when aged 18, I had come out of school and I was diagnosed with a brain abscess. The world just felt very small at that moment. What we long for most in those moments is simply someone by our side, to be with us, to comfort us. When reading these letters from soldiers in the war, what struck me was the deep loneliness that many of them felt at times. A moving example came from a Polish pilot who fought in the RAF. Despite serving alongside the Allies, his country, Poland, was effectively lost to the Soviet Union. And he wrote in a letter, he said, "Our war is lost. The war which we fought so hard and so long to win. It is a very long time since I felt so alone." Now, whatever it is that makes you feel alone today, our psalm reminds us that God promises to be with us as we take refuge in him. It's a promise he makes. After telling his disciples that he'll soon be leaving them, Jesus reassures them. He says, "Surely I am with you always, to the very end of the age." There are times as a Christian when you feel tangibly his presence with us by his Spirit, and it can bring such comfort to know you're not alone. He is with you always. But perhaps even more comforting is knowing he's still with you even when you don't feel it. Jesus' promise is not based on our emotions, it's not based on our circumstances, but on his unchanging faithfulness. So as we close, as we remember today both the trouble and the sacrifice that others have faced, our psalm today invites us to look to the one who is our ever-present help in trouble. The God who is powerful enough to overcome the troubles and personal enough to walk alongside us with it, through it. He is our refuge and our comfort. And as you take refuge in him, he is with you always, to the very end of the age. I'm going to pray a short prayer now that you might like to echo in your hearts, just quietly in your hearts, a way of responding to God's invitation this morning to find refuge and comfort in him. And for some here, it might be just a sense of recommitting yourself to him as he has never stopped being committed to you. But for others, it might be that you just want to come to him for the very first time. So just a moment of quiet, and then I'm going to lead us in this prayer that you might like to echo in your hearts. So thank you, Lord, that I can know the comfort of your presence, that whatever troubles we face today, whatever emotions this day brings, you promise to be with your people always, to the very end of the age. So today, Lord, I accept your powerful and personal invitation. Please come into my life by your Spirit. May I know your peace now and forever. Amen.